I will back up Jamie's point about thinking about files and archiving, though, in this community. Many key researcher files have been lost because there weren't arrangements made. There is an Assassination Archive and Research Center in D.C., but the files in there are not easily accessible. They have a small office in D.C., and then they have a big warehouse in Virginia, and you have to sort of know what you're looking for, and they're overcrowded now because all of the records released under JFK Records Act went to them as well. But there are some individual researchers, and then I have some files from individual researchers. But for instance, an early critic, Holcomb Heston, just to give you one example, who had tracked intelligence from World War II period forward and was one of the first to figure out that there were major questions. And he wrote Oswald Assassin or Fall Guy. He wrote a Truth newsletter. He wrote many books about the Kennedy assassination. Well, he had a house in New York, and I just by chance ran into a guy who had some of his books and truth letters that I didn't have, and I was trying to arrange with him. I said, well, how'd you get these? And he said, oh, I know his wife, and I liked his writing, but he liked his writing outside of the Kennedy assassination, so he wasn't that concerned with these materials. He gave them to me. But he said that when Holcomb Heston passed on, that May had given these to him, and I said, well, what about the rest of the stuff? Where is it? And he said, oh, well, she just told the realtor to clean the basement out. So all of the files, not just on Kennedy assassination, but the mob and all these years of, he wrote a book called They Called Intelligence, just were turned into garbage. And unfortunately, that happens too if we don't think ahead. And it's one of the reasons that I'm hoping that my sort of major project here is a little late in my life, but I'm doing everything I can to get grants to make it happen, is to start a hidden history museum in Washington, D.C., where many people can see the exhibits, but also have a research center attached that would include the files and the work of all the critics.
An add-on to the Spy Museum.
Yeah, well, it's kind of like, I think we're sort of going to end up being the anti-spy museum, but that's not a very pleasant place over there. But they, for instance, got a $6 million grant. It's a joint D.C. and federal grant to start that museum, and it's potentially open to other museums in D.C. So I'm getting funded at this point to search funding, but I am getting some grants from a private foundation. But I think we should think about keeping things and making sure that we have provisions for our records and files if something should happen to us.
Yeah, I was literally just talking to Paul Schrade about Greg Stone's files were turned over to USC, and they made me jump through all these hoops to see them. And when I finally got through the last hoop, they said, well, you have to tell us exactly what you're looking for, and then we'll go get it. I'm like, I won't know what I'm looking for till I find it. So it's like, what a nightmare, all these, this great collection.
Well, I'm very worried about them being given to universities for that reason. I don't think they know the significance of them. Things have disappeared out of the Dartmouth collection that Lanson did. I think we have to have people that are actually involved in wanting to know the truth have some control over these files. So that's a start anyway. And Shane O'Sullivan is next. He has this film, RFK Must Die. I think he's going to make a few opening comments here and then show you the film. And then at 7 o'clock we have dinner. So, and I think, does anyone have the time current?
5:39.
Okay, so it films an hour and 10 minutes. So that'll put us close to 7, and then he can have some questions or something at the end.
Should we postpone dinner? It's scheduled at 7 right now.
No, I think.
40 minutes to the film's on.
Oh, it's 40. Oh.
We'll run over. Do you want me to schedule dinner a little down?
I guess bump it back. Okay. All right. So we'll show is Shane here?
Yeah, I'm here.
Okay. He can come up, do an adequate introduction, except that I do know that he, again, another independent researcher, he worked on this film and put it together, and it's gotten some attention, and it has some interesting theses beyond the ones that we've been talking about already.
Okay, thanks.
And a book? Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mentioned the book last night, but Who Shot Bobby is his new book.
Yeah.
Don't know, do you have copies with you?
I've just my one copy because it's too heavy. So it's 560 pages. Okay, hello. It's a really pleasure to be here, and I've been here for a week or so, and I was lucky enough to be downtown Los Angeles on June 4th, the anniversary of the primary, and really felt it being down there so close to where everything happened. Unfortunately, I thought there would be a connector here from my laptop, but we seem to be missing.
It's right here.
Yeah, I think we need an adapter though. Does this?
You don't have a. Oh,
I think it's
'cause
too
a
big,
bag.
you know. Yeah.
Yeah, oh no, shit,
Anyway,
sorry.
I'm just going to improvise, and I'll just go by my presentation here just to reference. But I just want to address just a couple of things that came up during the day, first of all, because, you know, I've tried, with the film, obviously, it's 102 minutes, so I go through the evidence, you know, relatively quickly just to introduce all the various controversies and what I think is still pertinent to any reinvestigation. And the one thing that kind of came after I completed my film has, of course, been Phil Van Prague's work and also Dr. Joling, which I think is just, it's really extraordinary. I actually visited it with Phil on the first night of my stay. I flew directly to meet him and just was, you know, really mightily impressed by the work he's done. And I mentioned that in the last chapter of the book. Luckily, I could do that, you know. But I think, you know, with the book, I've tried to basically go back to the files and rebuild the case from the ground up in terms of all the information that I think could be in the book that could support a retrial or a reinvestigation or anybody coming new to the case, just to see the totality of information there, and, you know, albeit 560 pages, but at least it's in one place. So I did look at some of these issues that we've been talking about today, and one of them, I think, a key one is the route switch. So as far as my understanding is concerned, it was Dutton and Barry basically made the decision, primarily Dutton, 5 minutes before the end of the speech. And they were just at the side of the stage. They expected Kennedy to come down the way he had gone on. And as we know, you know, there was the shout of "This way, Senator," which again doesn't sound like Carl Euchre's voice to me, perhaps Eddie Menasian. And, you know, so there was like almost a 3-stage process where Kennedy was spirited in the wrong direction. So basically he didn't leave the stage the way Dutton and Barry expected. Dutton and Barry were the only ones who really knew that he would be going to the press conference through the pantry. So in the void that followed, Carl Euchre beckoned, perhaps Menasian shouted at him to go behind the curtain. But literally as Euchre, Menasian and Kennedy jumped off the back of the stage and went through that anteroom at the back of the stage, all three of them still felt they were going down to the ambassador room downstairs for another speech to the overflow crowd that had been waiting. So there's some as yet unidentified figure at that back hallway door, which later, you know, supposedly there was a bullet in the hinge of that door, that seems to have directed the senator into the pantry. So perhaps some figure who was told by Dutton and Barry, when they'd made this decision 5 minutes before the end of the speech, had actually done a quick recce through the pantry just to see if the way was clear. And I think they told Jack Gallivan, Michael, who was one of the advance men, and I think a young advance man whose name escapes me at the moment, but he was with Gallivan. So whether it was Gallivan who was waiting at the door to spirit him through, Gallivan and Uno Timmonson, who was the guy who was the hotel staffer who was guiding Kennedy around, Timmonson and Gallivan basically then led the senator through the pantry ahead of him, while Carl Euchre had his hand, and Thane Eugene Caesar, as we know, had him by the right elbow. So, you know, it's still a little bit of a mystery there, but one figure I was just going to briefly talk about before we introduce the film, among some kind of evidence that I haven't put in the film, but maybe you might be interested in, based on what we've been discussing, is basically the head of hotel security, William F. Gardner, who I think has been very likely mentioned in all the work on the case so far. But to me, he's very interesting when you go back in the files. I think he had 5 or 6 interviews with the FBI, and I think only 1 interview with the LAPD. And here is the head of hotel security, who's in charge of the hotel guards who were stationed there that night, and also nominally in charge of recruiting the 6 ace guards who were there. And so his reaction to the shooting is, you know, when you go back to the files, it's just completely bizarre. Because basically his story was that he was downstairs with 2 of his guards, just at the stairs leading from that back hallway down into the Ambassador Ballroom where Kennedy was due to go, and he was with 2 guards. And when the 2 guards were interviewed, they heard of the shooting. They heard the shouts upstairs. They heard various Kennedy girls come down shrieking, and something horrible had happened. And they all knew that there'd been a shooting, and Kennedy had been shot. But when he was interviewed by the FBI, Gardner said that basically this girl came up to him about 20 past 12, 20 past midnight, and said there's been a terrible accident. But at that point, Gardner didn't know what the terrible accident was or what it was about. So he went back to his office, and he didn't go back to the pantry, the scene of the crime, until 15 minutes later, when Kennedy's body had already been taken out of there, which, I find absolutely astounding, that he can give this kind of response in an FBI interview and not be questioned. And in follow-up interviews, this was never probed. And again, I haven't been able to establish exactly, where Gardner is now, but the rumor was coming from the actual boss of Ace Guard Service, Frank Hendricks, when he was interviewed by researcher Betsy Langman in the early 70s. Hendricks told Langman that Gardner had committed suicide on Christmas Eve, I think 1969, just a year after the shooting. And within months of the shooting, he'd also lost his job at the Ambassador Hotel. Rumors that he was fired, but basically there was another suggestion that he'd gone to law school, but then he committed suicide supposedly shortly thereafter. So to me, that's a major link in terms of perhaps a Judas figure. I find Dutton and Barry beyond reproach, because Dutton was in the JFK administration. He was such a Kennedy loyalist, and I've seen him in tears on various documentaries about Bobby's death. And Bill Barry, similarly, really worked his socks off to protect Kennedy from the crowd. So I just can't see them being involved. But was there another person, either in the Kennedy advance group or within the hotel staff? Gardner would be perfectly positioned to somehow mediate between what was going on and give the word to whoever may have been involved in a conspiracy as to what was going to happen. And when they've asked Gardner, where did he think Kennedy was going after the shooting, he's given 3 or 4 different responses. He's sent a guard into the pantry because he thought Kennedy was going in there. He's also sent guards to the bottom of the stairs because he thought Kennedy was going down to the ambassador room. He seems to be playing games with the whole thing, depending on who's asking the questions. So to me, he's somebody that deserves a bit more exploration. I think in terms of Michael Wayne, I'll send you the photographs, but there are actually photographs in the LAPD files in the California State Archives, because I did a major archive troll for my film. And yeah, there is actually that photograph by Steve Fontanini of Michael Wayne handcuffed with Augustus Mallard. And yeah, it's good. And they also, they have another photograph as well of all his poster paraphernalia and, all the things that he was actually carrying. So, that kind of convinced me that, Mallard, unless he was kind of part of this whole thing, he was there, he handcuffed Wayne, and obviously there's a photo of everything that Wayne had with him. So I personally find it difficult to believe. It's possible. But again, there were various witnesses who chased him across the lobby and stuff like that. So, I think for me, because I've been kind of burnt with the CIA stuff a little bit, as everybody's probably aware of. Yeah, so I got to be really careful now, I want to say. But basically, I think the simpler we keep this, the better. I think, the strategy in terms of sticking to the hard evidence, and then trying to connect the dots, but not overreaching prematurely, perhaps, as I know, quoting Sophocles myself, making my mistakes or whatever. But I think it's wise possibly to stick to 2 shooters, because we've sound forensic evidence for that. And I just think if there were blanks in a 3rd shooter, then you have a lot of bodies to shoot through to make that happen. So personally, I would look to 2 shooters. Obviously, the firing position from 1 inch behind the right ear, whether it's Caesar or not, obviously Phil's work with the H&R 922 suggests that. I personally feel it could be Caesar, but certainly if it was somebody else, if a professional hitman, Caesar was in the best position to see, who that hitman was, and he possibly knows a lot more than he's ever said. That would be my kind of position on it. And also, I think as we're having a kind of a forum about the issues in the case, I'd also, I fully support Phil and Dr. Jolling's work. There's one thing that still kind of troubles me a little bit about the accounting of the bullets, because the 1975 panel, for all its kind of inconclusiveness, basically did seem to prove that the Goldstein Kennedy neck bullet and the Wiesel bullet came from the same gun. Now, obviously, that's assuming that they were the original bullets. But, Dr. Noguchi was working closely with Wolfer over that first week of the investigation. He also re-examined the bullets in 1974 for Baxter Ward. He didn't actually, unfortunately, examine the markings, but he did see the bullets, I think, in front of the grand jury. He was probably presented them during the trial as well. So I tend to think the physical evidence, and there are photos in 68 and photos in 75 that they look superficially the same as well. I tend to think the bullets probably were the same, and even if they were faked, well, we still have the Wiesel bullet. The Wiesel bullet still seems to be in its original condition. Therefore, if Kennedy, Neck, Goldstein, and Wiesel all matched in 75, then it's going to be very difficult to fake that. I think, but where that leaves us in terms of the case is, I think Philip van Praag and Dr. Jolling suggest that those 3 bullets were fired by Caesar in his position. My problem with that, and just for the sake of debate, and I put it in the book as well, is that obviously if Kennedy is here and Caesar is firing from an inch behind the right ear, to get Goldstein and Wiesel, obviously he has to turn almost the full way to 180 degrees or whatever to make those shots. So for me, that's we don't need to prove that at this stage. Of course, we don't need to know who shot what, because as long as we can establish 2 shooters, that should in itself be enough to reopen the case. But it does make it tricky, because if you contemplate Sirhan making one of those shots, then obviously he is getting closer than the witnesses say he was. And if you look at the Goldstein and Wiesel shots, it makes sense that Sirhan would make those shots because they were in his line of fire. So I'm pretty certain now that there were 2 shooters. As to who shot what, I'm still a little bit up in the air on that. So let me just touch on another couple of points. I mean, while I'm here, maybe it's good to have a discussion, rather than go too quickly to the film, because that's on DVD, and I want to hear for today. So it'd be good to get your kind of feedback. But basically, on the David Morales point, without kind of spoiling the film at all, that was really my starting point for getting into this. I was a screenwriter at the time. I thought all the controversies around this case were fantastic for a screenplay, a kind of Oliver Stone companion piece for the RFK Assassination. And I was really scratching my head going oh my God, there's so many fantastic stories, how am I going to keep this to 90 minutes? But one of the other problems I had was that, I didn't trust the original police version of events, so I didn't have an ending to my film. So I had to figure out where I was going to go with that. So that really set the ball rolling in terms of my research. And being a filmmaker, the first thing you look for is the archive. Luckily enough, all the national networks and the affiliates were there. So there's 100 hours of footage there. I know it's really helped Phil in his work, and it's also been of great help to me. And so that's where, I felt at one point I'd spotted 3 alleged CIA agents in the footage, and that story will be told in the film, in the whole journey I went on with that. The only thing I'd say about that is, I realize at this point that photo identification is very difficult, just as witness statements in terms of muzzle distance and so on is very difficult. But I come back to my starting point really in getting involved in this case, that the evidence that Sirhan was programmed is quite over. The Congress has verified that the CIA was trying to create a Manchurian candidate for 16, 17 years prior to the assassination. The director of CIA at the time was Richard Helms, who was one of the people who initiated the program. So whether or not I found David Morales in the footage, the fact remains that he confessed that he was in Dallas and that he was in Los Angeles. And the figure I found in the footage, I still don't know who he is. Some people say he's Morales. Otherwise, if he isn't Morales, he could be a law enforcement officer who is there on the before the shooting, which again is what we were talking about earlier. And the official LAPD standpoint is that there was nobody there because they weren't invited, or that Kennedy didn't want them around. But we have this mysterious figure who is speaking to a colleague afterwards, and then comes out of the pantry with a number of LAPD officers afterwards. So whether it's the big Yaqui Indian Morales or some other unknown law enforcement official, it's still equally troubling to me. And also I'm very interested in a guy called Gene Shearer, who is the head of VIP security for LAPD. He was actually interviewed by C. David Heyman for fairly trashy book on RFK, which doesn't help David Heyman's credibility. But basically, he quoted Scherer when he interviewed him as basically saying that he was there on the night. He had spoken to Kennedy about being there in an official capacity to protect the senator, but Kennedy didn't want him around because Bill Barry and Rosie and Rafer were enough. But somehow, as he's quoted in the book, Scherer had a premonition, so he went there anyway. And so you see a photograph of Gene Scherer and his, patrol car colleague, James Harrell, actually frog marching Rafer Johnson into the Good Samaritan Hospital, and Rafer has his hand inside his jacket protecting the gun that's in his pocket. Because basically Rafer at that point, had taken the gun in the pantry and put it in his jacket pocket. And then at the central receiving, he'd known Scherer from various VIP security arrangements, and basically they were then assigned to accompany him to Rampart via Good Samaritan to deposit the gun with LAPD. So to me, that's still unexplained as well. I mean, how Scherer and his colleague Harrell, who you can go through the intelligence logs and actually monitor where their patrol car was, given the communications logs. So why they were at the hotel, and who else was at the hotel, and what this hotel head of security had to do with everything, I think are the closest I've come to kind of an inside job, or others on the ground working on this. But anyway, maybe that's going to more detail than you care for at this point. So anyway, I'll let the film maybe speak for itself. Any questions at this point before I retire? Go ahead. Yeah.
Some parallels from what you're talking about. There's a similar problem with police coverage of Martin Luther King, and stories about whether they were asked not to, or that parallels. And there's information about military coverage of John F. Kennedy that was supposedly ordered off that morning. But the stripping of security seems to be a pattern, and usually we end up not knowing who ordered it or was asked for or not. But I mean, that's a pattern in some of the cases.
Yeah, I mean, I think there was a lot of banter back and forth. I think Pierre Salinger said they refused us, and LAPD said, well, we were never asked. And in the middle of that, you have kind of Bobby's romantic fatalism that if they're going to get me, they're going to get me. I'm just going to go and embrace the crowds and try and pull the country back from the brink at that point, So it's a kind of a mix of all that. But I mean, certainly to an extent, he was an easy target because of the spontaneity of his campaign and these last-minute decisions. They could look organic, or they could look spontaneous on behalf of the Kennedy staff, which obviously plays into the hands of a planned assassination, where if they can manipulate that or have a messenger inside. And then just on the point of knowing where he was going to go, I mean, again, when I spoke to covert operatives about this, their first question was always, how did he get, who got him into the killing zone? And they would suggest that, yes, perhaps there was a second assassin lurking in the Ambassador Ballroom downstairs, or lurking just by that stairwell, so that, whichever way he went, he was going to be got that night. And that would be, that seems the logical approach, really, in terms of, organising, because I think it was a key date. And obviously Sirhan's notebook, if you're going to go by his motivation, it says he must be got before June 5th. So if that's all going to work, then he's got to be got that night,
You said that Morales or not, the guy spoke to 6 policemen after the shooting. Is that what you said?
Well, yeah. I mean, after some of you may have seen the kind of BBC segment that was on YouTube and all that kind of stuff. So after I went through more footage, I found more clips of this Morales figure. And obviously there's some dispute as to whether it's him or not, but this big, very distinctive looking figure basically emerges from the pantry surrounded by LAPD officers at a time when, the pantry has clearly been sealed off by officers investigating the crime. And in an earlier clip, he's, basically taking notes and surveilling the room with a colleague in a pencil moustache. And, without hypothesizing too much, I mean, they look clearly like law enforcement officers to me. So, I think he's still a figure of interest, whoever he is.
Who he might be?
Yeah.
Moldea has a whole bunch of big stories and little tiny footnotes, and one of them
Yeah.
is several sheriff's department intelligence officers
Yeah.
were at the ambassador. Just a little footnote.
Yeah.
You think, wow, okay, now this guy had taken all the notes, talking to the cops.
Yeah.
Sounds like a sheriff's department intelligence officer. Also, there was SID, Special Intelligence Division policeman there that night. It's in that book that came out a couple of years ago.
Yeah.
So those are pretty good prospects for the guy you're talking about.
Well, yeah, I mean, I agree. I mean, and I think it would be natural. I mean, talking to them, David Rayburner's in the film, who, he was kind of a freelance undercover operative at the time, and he was there. You know, he says in the film that basically they'd give us free tickets to these events just so we could have men on the ground if we needed them. So I think it would be unusual not to expect them to have somebody there, but, you know, the fact that it's never been acknowledged is kind of troubling. And so, yeah, I mean, that goes into the whole kind of deal as well, I think. Yeah. Yeah, go ahead. Yeah, sure.
Okay, in Gain Fonzie's book, because he was the
Yeah.
first one to surface Morales.
Yeah.
The quote that he had in his book was only about being in Dallas. What I want to know is, when did Los
Sure.
Angeles arrive, and who was that from?
Well, yeah, it was kind of curious because I think my paper trail there was Larry Hancock's appendix to his first edition of Someone Who Would Have Talked. And then I think I spotted it in that, and that was taken from Noel Twyman's book, which is a self-published, very rare book that hardly anybody's seen.
No.
But anyway, so basically Twyman did a follow-up visit to Carbajal and Walton. And whereas Fonzie only got part of the quote,
Right.
when-
The reason I bring
yeah.
that up is there's a woman, Madeline Brown, who had supposedly gone to a party in Texas. This is on the JFK case.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
every time, that story is told, new people show up at this party. This
Right,
assassination.
yeah, yeah.
And so I worry when quotes start getting stretched beyond the original, how credible that is, if that's really what he said, or Carba, what's his name?
Yeah, sure. I found it kind of convincing because I know Fonzie, when Walton first told him that, Morales had said I was in Dallas, Reuben Carbajal wouldn't admit to it, and he kind of quietly nodded. So he's kind of come out of his shell and just, felt comfortable betraying his friend or, going public about his friend. So Robert Walton, he first stated to Twyman in, I think, 93, 94, and he stuck to it over the years. And the good thing about following through on this, despite all the kind of dispute about the CIA agents or whatever, has been actually, I've spoken to the eldest daughters of Morales. David Talbot helped me put me in touch with them, and also his son, and they've been incredibly candid and open. I had probably 90-minute telephone conversations with them both, and it's very good because it kind of establishes where he was at that time. He was nominally in Laos as the kind of the head of the station in Siem Reap, in Pak Se. So he was in charge of the kind of CIA air operations down there. But basically the family didn't follow him to Laos because he was building a house for them and blah, blah, blah. So the family didn't follow him to Laos for 2 weeks, until 2 weeks after the RFK assassination. So they don't have an alibi as to where he was during that time. So the fact, he made the statement, I'm in Dallas, I was in Los Angeles. He obviously hated the Kennedys, and, there's a good track record in that. So I just feel, obviously it is, hypothesizing to a certain extent at this stage, but if we do look at the CIA as a possible organization behind this, David Morales is, without any doubt, one of the type of operatives they would have got, to be there, and who could have done this on the ground. So that's why I'm not kind of throwing that totally out with the bathwater. I think that confession is still important, potentially. But as I said, I think the ballistics are the way forward, probably at this point, against the other balance of the evidence in terms of Sirhan being programmed and being manipulated and not being the real shooter.
So is it correct that there were no LAPD around the ambassador that night for either of the political events that was going on? I think there were two others, maybe they're going on at the same time.
I think there was like some sort of traffic violation, so I think there were two cops in the parking lot giving somebody a ticket or something like that. And then Mr. Shiraga was out getting cigarettes, for freebies from the local store, and he was the first to react. So yeah, and he has his own suspicions, in terms of advanced knowledge within LAPD, because again, I think he was supposed to stay in the station that night, and his superiors wanted to go out and patrol and stuff like that, so he's very curious about that. And obviously the way his evidence got, disappeared from the files. But yeah, I think that the Scherer and Harrell, to me, obviously they were at the hotel. Why, as to other LAPD work on the case, will certainly. I feel the main thing at this point is that 40 years on, the history of this case as a crime is basically been written by Hernandez, Pena, and Wolfer. Three of the most, unreliable individuals you could ever come across. I mean, just going back to the files, the falsification, the bullying of witnesses, the lying on the stand, the false accounting of it's just endless, So how American history can be written by a trio like that, with their links to the CIA. I mean, I won't go into it here, but it's in the book that I've actually found out that Hernandez, the reason he was in Venezuela in the early 60s, it's in a book by a guy who did, his name fails me at the moment, but basically there was a mission where the Venezuelan, some sort of leftist group in Venezuela was causing trouble for the government down there, so they got 4 Spanish-speaking LAPD officers to go down and teach the local police how to do some LAPD police work, whatever stripe that, whatever that means, but to fight the insurgents. And so I strongly suspect that Hernandez was basically as part of that team. And Robert Kennedy, strangely enough, was the guy who ordered that mission during his 62, 63, gung-ho phase. It's actually the same special group that he sat on that coordinated the secret war on Castro, also set up the Office of Public Safety, and the Office of Public Safety was basically charged with sending American police officers to Central and South America and Southeast Asia to train the local police forces in, police tactics to deal with counterinsurgency. So, the Office of Public Safety, basically provided a cover for Hernandez, Pena, and later David Morales through an office in Washington that was managed by Byron Engel, who was a CIA veteran, and who later grew to be very good friends with Pena. And that's where Pena went when he retired from LAPD in late '67. So, we have a kind of odd crucible here where we have, the Morales and all these other kind of covert ops who would use AID and Office of Public Safety for cover while teaching, torture techniques or whatever they did, in the late '60s. Exactly, yeah. So, I'm very sure that David Morales would have known Byron Engel, the boss of the program, very well, and Pena and Hernandez were mixed up in the same deal, and those are the links that I think deserve more examination.
Yeah, one question that I just had that I've always had a hard time wrapping my head around, but this is from a modern perspective of police work.
Yeah.
Was, because I didn't live in LA in '68, I lived in Northern California, that you have multiple political rallies going on in a hotel with hundreds upon hundreds and hundreds of people, very opposite sides of the political spectrum, and that the LAPD would say, hey, you want us there? No? Okay, we won't show up. It seems like the most bizarre statement to me of why would you care if they want you there or not? It's a matter of public safety that there's a potential explosion between these opposing political camps with all of these people.
When we have a demo, they're there whether we want it.
Oh, yeah.
The curious thing, it's awkward. I'm such a Kennedy fan, but at the same time, when you read the reports of those motorcades, it was almost war between the LAPD and Fred Dutton and the Kennedy supporters, because they wanted to basically take to the streets and have this great celebration, and the LAPD cops were just really hardcore and just get your people back off onto the pavement and clean it up and don't do traffic violations, and they gave them 100 tickets in the last motorcade. So it was just there was such bitterness between the two camps, historically, that that played into it.
It just seems strange to me. It's like if it was just Kennedy there that night.
Yeah.
I could almost see them saying, all right, screw you. You don't want us there. Have a good time.
Yeah.
But the fact that, who else was there?
Rafferty was there. And
Why wouldn't they be there at least to say, well, what if something breaks out? We want to be able to protect everyone. That just seems very strange.
I don't know. At a victory celebration until that night.
Well, there was all sorts of finger pointing went on afterwards, but the fact is they weren't there, and Kennedy's you have to admit Kennedy's security was almost non-existent. Also, just out of his his whole approach. He just wanted to go to the people, and if he was gonna, I think that every day was like Russian roulette, I think he said, and if they're gonna get me, they're gonna get me. So that's part of his whole appeal, I suppose. That he basically risked that to try and do what he did, which was part of his whole kind of mystique and why it's so admirable. But for me, also this, we have to go to the story of Sirhan as well, because if you do, given the benefit of the doubt, his story of how he came to be at the ambassador is just completely bizarre. I mean, it's just a chance incident after chance incident. I think he obviously he went to the firing range, which is premeditation on one level. But then he went to have coffee with friends at Pasadena City College. He was thinking, okay, will I change my tires tonight, or will I go shoot pool? His friend has to look for a job, so he can't go shoot pool. So he sees this Jewish march that's not actually on that night, it's on the following night, but it gets him all worked up about the Middle East. And then he turns up in the hotel not even knowing Kennedy's going to be there. I mean, it's so detailed, his account, that I find it very credible. But it just makes, like, how does it tally with the planned assassination, just even more kind of head scratching in terms of, how he got to be there. So obviously the girl in the polka dot dress is one kind of needle in a haystack about that, in terms of a handler or somebody he was primed to meet. And Dr. Spiegel, I think, does a very good job in the film of explaining how that could happen, how Sirhan, in the months leading up to the shooting, basically he was a loner, he didn't have many friends, he would go to the library or go to the racetrack gambling. So there was nobody accounting for where he was at any given time or any given day. So the idea that he could be manipulated, there was nobody watching to see if that would happen. So we don't know how he was recruited, but he was certainly the ideal candidate with the ideal motivation to be manipulated in the way he perhaps was.
You suppose Forrest Gump was inspired by this? I'm just joking.
I haven't seen it in so long. I haven't. I mean, you have to be careful to distinguish between coincidences and it's all on the balance of what they say. But I mean, Sirhan's just been. I mean, it really must be a 40-year Oscar-winning performance. If he's convinced, he certainly convinced me. He convinced all the psychiatrists who worked with him, both for the defense and prosecution, that he couldn't remember, that he was probably in hypnotic state at the time of the shooting, etc., etc. And he's just kept the story up so well and in such detail. Obviously, people haven't been listening to him to a certain extent because he really hasn't had a fair hearing. And Grant Cooper made it absolute shambles of the trial. And as we know, LAPD did a terrible investigation. But I still think, on the balance of the evidence, if he was retried today, there's no way in the world he would get first-degree murder. Whether he fired the fatal shot or not, I severely doubt that he was in command of his full faculties at the time of the shooting. And if he got second degree or manslaughter, he would have already been released. So I think just on a pure justice level, in terms of giving a guy who's been 40 years behind bars a fair hearing or fair investigation, we owe that to him, and we also owe it to kind of history in terms of unraveling the LAPD smokescreen over what really happened, So, yeah.
In support of part of your thesis, there were documents that were released under the JFK Act that regarded Martin Luther King and Robert Kennedy. And it's clear from those records that, and others that we got loose under FOIA, that King was being surveilled not only by FBI COINTELPRO, but also by FBI RIBAT, and anti-communist elements, and the same informant that was given the information to them that was making them think that King was being influenced by communists, that informant was telling him that Robert Kennedy was being influenced by the same ones. And then, in addition to those, though, we know that Lantern Spike under Garden Plot and Army intelligence was spying on King right to the end of his life, and so was, and these were all spying very thoroughly, looking through, putting bugs in his room and watching him and knowing where his movements were going to be and looking through his trash can. But the third group looking at him was CIA, primarily J.M. Wade. And that's in the document. The other thing you mentioned is the VIP service people in L.A.
Yeah.
And when I worked on the Reagan shooting, there's a guy that's clearly in the VIP protection for Reagan on the day of that shooting, who comes over, and I watched the ABC footage for many hours, and he plants a 22 to replace the 38 that Hinckley was actually firing and that was picked up by the Secret Service. You can see the guy pocket it. And then it's a VIP guy that plants the 22. And there was a guy from the DC VIP, along with the Minnesota FBI, that showed up at Wellstone's crash site in a very short period of time. And he's one of the cards that the sheriff got was a DC VIP cop, along with all these Minnesota FBI's.
Well, I think another program that hasn't, certainly not much has been written about it, but again, I think the Rockefeller Committee covered in the 70s is Operation Chaos,
Absolutely.
which again was really tightly held. I mean, it was literally Helms and Cord Meyer and Richard Ober. I mean, like 3 or 4 people knew about it. And basically that was working at kind of city level. Los Angeles would be one of those cities where they were working with the local police departments to surveil, nominally the anti-war movement to see if it was being funded from overseas or by the Russians or the Chinese or whatever. But obviously, I mean, that could be manipulated in all sorts of ways to work with LAPD. I know Phil Melanson, he found some kind of report of how the CIA and LAPD had been kind of working together, CIA had been providing training to, I think, Los Angeles and Chicago police in the fall of '67, and in return, the LAPD could provide cover for CIA operatives, and you scratch my back, I'll scratch yours kind of thing. So obviously, if any CIA operatives were involved, that provides an easy cover for them to be integrated within LAPD or work in Los Angeles on Operation Chaos or other programs. And again, there's the crossover with the Spanish-speaking officers like Peña and Hernandez, who somehow were chosen to then have day-to-day control of the case. So it's all quite.
Intelligence people like Daniel Groth, who arrested Thomas Arthur Valley, was naval intelligence working under Chicago PD and led the raid against Mark Clark and Fred Hampton. There's another naval intelligence guy in Memphis who's the one that comes up and cradles King in his arms and then later works for CIA, but at the time his identity is Memphis Police.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the key thing for me is, the backgrounds of the 3 or 4 guys who were in charge of the investigation, just linked to all these other, covert organizations that only 3 or 4 people knew about. And they went, those three or four people were right at the top of the CIA. So it's, and if Helms and Gottlieb had destroyed all those records, we would have never have heard of MK Ultra or Bluebird or Artichoke, But I think some financial records were omitted, and that's how we got to find out. Otherwise, it would have never happened, and people would write off as science fiction, So it's pretty scary stuff. Yeah.
One small comment and a question. When I was with Allard Lowenstein in Chief Ed Davis's office, I think it was 1975, when we submitted those 64 questions, which were never answered, and in fact embargoed because there were contradictions. I saw on the coffee table in Davis's outer office 2 reports on CIA training activities that the police department was involved in. I don't know if there's any search in the archives that would bring those up, but I saw those that day. Question is, I was with you when you interviewed Frank Burns, and for the first time, we did a lot of work with him. He said that he felt powder burns on his face. I'm not sure which side of the face.
Must be the right.
Juan Romero also said that.
Yeah.
Thane Eugene Caesar also said that. Now, I don't know how close they were to the Sirhan gun. If Caesar was firing, he was close to his gun and could have gotten the powder from his own gun, not from the Sirhan gun. We know he was a distance from the Sirhan. Have you gotten into that area?
Yeah, I mean, I think certainly Frank Burns felt powder on his cheek. I would feel that, obviously Sirhan did fire, and he probably fired eight times because they found 8 shells in the gun. So I would feel that Burns would have, he would have had his back. Burns would have had his back turned to Caesar from his position. He was off Kennedy's right shoulder. Caesar would have been behind him. So I would sense that Romero and Burns probably got hit by, powder burns from Sirhan's gun, the gun that didn't actually hit Kennedy, from what it sounds like. And then Caesar, I mean, I think it's covered in an open and shut case, that the blowback may have come from Caesar's own weapon, potentially, because, he would have been reasonably far away from Sirhan's guns, so it seems like quite a reach. But I think those two witnesses, Euchre and also Frank Burns, the way he acted out in his living room, I mean, that's really compelling that the two of them were between Sirhan and Kennedy. So, I mean, how could Sirhan's gun have got behind and shot from an inch behind the right ear if Burns was physically, and Euchre were physically blocking him, and then Euchre, you know, by his own account, and with the pause in the gunfire on the audio recording, you know, somehow stopped him or diverted the gun arm after 2 shots. It just doesn't make any sense. So, I think all of that is very compelling evidence that there were two guns, and so I wouldn't take it any further than that. And it's kind of frustrating in connecting the dots that there are all these kind of intimations of kind of CIA or greater involvement, but yeah, I guess you shouldn't overstretch. I should learn from experience. Although I would say on this John Maher thing, I would just caution you as well, because I spent a lot of money to go up to Vancouver, to fly up to Vancouver to meet him, because with Paul's assistance in getting in touch. And his whole approach was basically that we were going to be, what would you call it? We'd go into a joint venture together, be business partners.
He's totally wanting to make
Oh, he's totally, yeah. And you know, his whole YouTube advertisement on the anniversary was kind of playing into that. So I think until somebody pays him quite a wad of cash, you know, nothing more is going to be forthcoming. And of course, whatever is forthcoming is kind of tainted by that to a certain extent.
He has had some surgeries lately, so he might talk. He's like, I don't want to die older than what I know.
Well, that's what he told me 18 months ago, and he's still here. So it's like, yeah. So anyway, he just kept calling me for a while, and then he could see I wasn't. So I was like backpedaling.
I blew him off too for years. So,
But I mean, the quote that he gave you is very interesting, Lisa. And obviously, you know, if he did give documents to Larry, I'd love to see them. But you just got to be a bit cautious. And I mean, the same I think goes for Moldea as well. You know, who's kind of put out these blanket denials of all the work that's happening at the moment. You know, if I just share among friends, basically, what Moldea said to me when I approached him, I tried to interview Caesar for my film. And basically, Moldea, I said, well, you know, he won't tell you anything he hasn't already told me. But, well, I said, you know, how could I make it happen? And he said, well, do you have $50,000? And, you know, so basically Moldea was like the agent for Caesar to set up the interview for 50 big. And then he also told me that, you know, because he feels Caesar is innocent, Caesar at one point felt so grateful to him that Caesar actually asked Moldea to be the godfather to one of his children. So, which is, you know, so Moldea must really be 100% confident that Caesar wasn't involved, but I mean, that's pretty creepy stuff to me. So also what I mean, I suppose, in terms of Moldea's profile is that he's, you know, he can't go back at this stage. He can't turn back and say Caesar was involved, because he just looked like, you know, an idiot. So, which is not to say that he didn't do great work in his time on the case, but I just found the U-turn at the end of his book completely unconvincing, and also, yeah, Mel Ayton, my great British compatriot. Well, I mean, again, just to share on that, you know, just to get my. Basically, I know for a fact that, you know, I contacted Phil Harrison because, you know, again, I just wanted to get kind of an objective reading on all this audio stuff. And I know Phil Harrison for a fact has not had time to look at Philip and Dr. Jolling's book, or, you know, basically integrate all of their work and the whatever 30 or 40 pages in the book, going into great detail about it. He's just snowed under at work and he hasn't had time to look at it. Yet Ayton's come out with this new article saying, you know, rubbishing it and saying it's only 7 shots and all the rest of it. So he just takes shortcuts and just doesn't look into things properly. And in his book, if you go to Ayton's book, if you've the guts to buy it, he actually says in the book that Brzezinski was in the pantry at the time of the shooting, which anybody who's followed, you know, the work of Phil will know that he was, you know, 40 feet away at the time of the first shot and gradually getting closer. And so obviously, you know, the gunshots are getting slightly louder, and unless you have that information, well, you know, how on earth are you supposed to analyze the recording? So that tells you everything you need to know about Mel Ayton, I think, personally. Which, you know, he's a dogged researcher, but I just think he's just not particularly honest in his presentation. He just tends to cherry pick. But then I would say that, wouldn't I? So, Okay, well, yeah, I don't want to, delay dinner too long. So, and you can, feel free to break into the film if you, at any point.
Does it have a logical break?
I just recut it, so I mean, just stop whenever. Play half it and go.
What are we
I
set
don't know.
for now out there?
7:30, 7:45 with me giving them a half-hour lead time, so it's still adjustable.
What time are we at now?
We're about 6:15 right now.
Almost 6:30.
Almost 6:30 now?
6:25.
Okay. Well, I mean, why don't we?
Go to 7:30 and then.
Yeah, I mean, what time are we now? 6:30.
Almost.
Okay, so yeah, I mean, it'll go just up to the CIA stuff, and then stop and take a breather. Yeah, then leave you hanging. So yeah, I mean, it kind of presents the case to date, and then yeah, it gives you a bit of a hook to come back to. Yeah, so hopefully, and I'll be around later if you have any more questions after the film as well. Thank you. Yeah.
Our Memphis conference is on a DVD that Joe Green was nice enough to make these for sale for COPA's benefit for $5, and also the new documents released in Dallas by the DA that found them there, both. So we've got some DVDs. If you haven't seen them, they're out in the tape. There's also some KPFK material out there.
We have sound.
Well, this
Lights.
Trying to get back up to the, yeah, there you go. Sorry to just.
Are we still plugged in there? Sound-wise?
Yeah. As a filmmaker, it's very painful when you're doing something there and the sound's gone.
Broke there.
You're feeling the agony, right?
There's a disconnect here.
You feel your pain.
Yeah.
Shane is smart. He leaves the room.
The book was just outlined basically what he think may have happened in his hypotheses, but there was a limit to how he could really, with the new material, really go any further with it in terms of investigation. Because of, I know he's, I think 72, 73 years old, he still does a lot of snowshoe racing up there, so he's still quite active, but he actually has some medical problems because basically his hands, for instance, were exposed to toxic chemicals while he was working for the CIA on the Cuban program. So basically he has military-induced injuries that, are part of his, his pension and affect his livelihood and all the rest of it. Like, so I think he's a really brave guy, and he should be commended, even if, obviously some of the stuff in his book may be inconclusive.
Do you know why Bob Dorff and Deborah Conway dumped him as a private investigator?
No.
Can you mention who you're referring to? If you
Oh, sure. This is about Bradley Ayres, who was mentioned in the film there.
He had, he did something unbelievable in his book. He led these investigation away from David Phillips as Maurice Bishop, and I couldn't believe it. I was thinking anybody in the case would know that those two are the same person, and him leading us astray. I couldn't understand that unless the guy never read Fonzie's book and really isn't up on the JFK case per se.
Yeah.
Is that the case, you think?
No, I think he's read those books, but I guess he's just a guy of quite strong opinions, and he tends to go with his gut feeling on things, and he felt quite strongly that this Gordon Campbell might be Maurice Bishop, and he was quite aware of the fact that Gaten Fonzie and others were absolutely sure it was David Phillips, but he's still, but that's just the way he's wired, but on a personal level, I really have a lot of time for him.
Sure.
We were hoping he would come to Dallas, but I guess he had a falling out with his publisher, and then I don't.
Oh, don't go into that. Yeah, and his publisher on Zenith Secret was
We weren't
really
able to invite him through that route, and I don't know if he would come to Dallas, but if you know him, maybe you could ask him if he could.
No, I'm sure he'd be delighted to, but he had a really appalling experience with that publisher who really messed him around, and then anyway, the publisher was a nightmare, basically.
Well, if you have a way to reach him.
I do, yeah.
Please
So,
invite him
okay,
for us.
definitely, in November, yeah.
Shane, is your book out now?
Thank you, Paul. You're so good. No, Paul said I should plug my book, so I'm holding his copy because I don't have mine. But yeah, anyway, I'll just let you know where the film's available, just if you're interested. The DVD's available now, and it's actually showing on a thing called the documentary channel, like a cable channel, on Dish Network 197 on Monday evening at 8 o'clock, which is, it's good that I can have a TV airing. And then the book, this 560-page tome, is just been published as well. So it's called Who Killed Bobby? The Unsolved Murder of Robert F. Kennedy, which reflects my feelings on it. So yeah, and there's websites for both rfkmustie.com and whokilledbobby.net. So if you want to contact me through those, I'm more than happy to take any other questions you might have. Yeah?
I was a little bit shocked. Wayne Smith said he'd been known David Morales in Cuba and worked with him. Now, what does a man like Wayne Smith, who, from everything I know, is a good man, be doing with someone like David Morales? Did he elaborate?
I don't think he worked with him in Cuba. Well, no, he did work with him in Cuba. Yeah, he was in the embassy. I mean, basically the diplomatic connection. I mean, Morales would be under either embassy cover or under State Department cover, as I said, with the Office of Public Safety and the AID program. So that's how he would know Morales. I mean, they worked together in the embassy in Havana, the U.S. Embassy in Havana, and then also he said he'd bump into him in corridors in the Department of State, where Morales was like a legit Agency for International Development guy stroke undercover assassin, so, and that's how we'd kind of know him. So it was difficult when I was editing the film because, Bradley Ayres and Wayne Smith, when they saw the even more photos of Morales in Vietnam and Peru and so on, that strengthened their identification of Morales in the video. So it made it a very difficult situation for me that I had these very credible people who felt it was still him, but personally I began to think, well, maybe not, and obviously his family. I talked to the Morales family, and again, you think in the family is interested to deny it was him as well, but they were so open and candid with me that I came to trust their judgment as well. And as I say, it's left kind of hanging because they don't have an alibi as to where Morales was that night. And I still think the confession is kind of meaningful in terms of, putting forward his alleged involvement in this potentially. How we'll ever, put more on that, I don't know. Yeah.
The Morales figure, whatever you want to call it.
Yeah, inverted commas.
He looked to me like he was security. In the shirt, everything about him reeked of security. Did you ever were able to identify all the security officers of the hotel and look at their pictures to see if any of them matched?
Yeah. See, this is it. This is what still troubles me about that footage. And Brad Johnson, who's worked closely with Phil and Dr. Jolling on the audio side, I mean, he still feels this guy may be of interest because only 2 of the security people wore plain clothes. The rest of them wore uniforms. And so the only 2 plainclothes guys were William F. Gardner, the suspicious head of hotel security, and Fred Pat Murphy, who was, he retired from LAPD in 1944, so he must have been up in his 60s, and, a white kind of Irish ex-LAPD lieutenant. So it definitely wasn't either of those guys.
What were the uniforms like? Did you ever get a good look at the
well,
the first shot, the long distance shot, it seems like he's actually got a uniform shirt, but not the jacket off.
Oh, really?
It looks to me like he's got a uniform, but he's taking the jacket off.
I don't know. I didn't read it that way, but I think the Ace Guard, where we've seen Caesar in the Ace Guard uniform, the grey one, and I think the Hotel Guard uniform was pretty similar. So it's clear that he isn't part of Hotel Security or Ace Guard service. So who is he? I mean, he's at the back of the Ambassador Ballroom downstairs before the shooting, and then especially that black and white image, the black and white video image of him, coming out of the pantry surrounded by those LAPD officers. It always conveys the status of some, somebody who's kind of in charge or deeply involved in the cleanup. So it's a bit frustrating that he's such a distinctive looking figure. You'd wish someone on LAPD or FBI could come forward and say, oh yeah, I used to work with him, and put my mind to rest on that. But I still haven't found out who he is. So
he's the ambassador of hotel mystery man.
Yeah, just don't call him Morales.
Shane, what was Caesar's work record? As I understand it, he was hired that week.
Yeah.
And this was his first job.
Well, yeah. He He actually, Hendricks, I think, brought out the records for Betsy Langman, I think, or Phil Melanson, maybe, I can't remember, but he looked at the work records in the history of the Ace Guard Service files, and basically he started work the week before. So obviously it was like, I think it was Tuesday, June 4th, he worked the Ambassador that night. A kind of a last minute thing, because he just come home from his shift at Lockheed, he got the call at 4:30 and then he went in at 6. So I don't know if he actually had a prior assignment before that. He started work with Ace Guard Service the previous week, but I don't know how many assignments he did. But certainly it was the first time he'd ever worked at the Ambassador, and he lied about that. He said he'd worked the Ambassador before, which is not the case. So yeah, I mean, it is strange that he was kind of parachuted in like that. And I think, you know, the other really curious thing to me about Caesar is that, you know, where he went after the shooting. Because that famous photograph of, you know, Kennedy spread-eagled and the bow tie on the floor, there's no evidence of the security guard, you know, Caesar getting to his feet or, you know, rushing to guard the senator. I mean, he's out of there. And his official story was that he went out of the service doors to the embassy room doors to alert the other Ace Guards, Jack Merritt and Albert Stowers. But that's not the case, because when the LAPD and the FBI interviewed those guys, they didn't mention Caesar. And Merritt actually went in the service doors after he heard of the shooting, brandishing his gun in the air, and as I said, saw this girl in the polka dot dress make a V for Victory sign and smile at the fallen Kennedy and leave with a couple of guys. So there's a little polka dot girl element there. And then after that, this fellow Ace security guard came up to Merritt and asks what happened. And the only Ace security guard that could have been would be Thane Caesar. So you're wondering, you know, where did he go immediately afterwards, and then why is he coming up to Merritt 3 or 4 minutes after the shooting going, you know, what happened? It's very...
What was his responsibility as a guard at that point to deal with Robert Kennedy, who was fallen, or to go call the police or something like that?
Well, it seems he didn't do any of those things. I mean, he lost his balance, whether he lost control of his gun arm and started firing accidentally or, you know, on purpose or whatever. But it seems like, you know, shortly after that he fled, came back. You know, obviously there's time there to dump the gun wherever he needs to, or, you know. But, you know, he's wavered so much every time he's asked he gives a different statement, and there's nobody who can verify what he did. And people he say he went to alert, they have no knowledge of him being there. So, and then obviously the video of him rambling around the hallways then an hour afterwards without his bow tie, and you know, it's kind of, or the clip-on tie, yeah. So
have you talked to anybody in the hotel staff who was working at that time? There's one person I've gotten to know, Margaret Burke, who is PR and marketing.
The historian, isn't she, for the Ambassador, is she?
Well, she has a book club, and
yeah,
and
I think
she wrote a book about the ambassador and a story about the case.
Well, there are a number of people still around. I mean, Uno Timmonson, who was actually the hotel staffer who was showing Kennedy around during his stay, and obviously the campaign were there for six to 8 weeks, I think, in the lead up. He runs the Figueroa Hotel in downtown. So he's, you know, he didn't really want to talk to me, but he might speak to somebody else.
Wouldn't talk to me either.
Oh, really? Okay.
So I haven't spoken to anyone in 30 years. I don't see why I should do it now.
Okay.
And William Law is a really persuasive guy. So,
yeah. And the other one, I mean, we brought up Michael Wayne earlier, and, you know, I spoke to him. He's still living in Los Angeles, so, you know, I have to leave tonight, but anybody wants to call up Michael Wayne and establish, you know, where he went with the gun, they could do that.
Goldstein at all?
No, I couldn't.
We thought we had him nailed at one point, but that Goldstein said he's not the one.
Oh, it's a different Goldstein?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
He matched in age and area. So
yeah.
He might just be denying, so.
Yeah.
I've got one other possibility of getting to him. Somebody interviewed him a couple of years ago.
Okay. Well, we can keep on plugging away.
Did you ever lead on Valerie Schulte in your travels at all?
Yeah, I mean, she worked for...
Or she is now?
Yeah, she works for NAB, the National Association of Broadcasters, as far as I'm aware.
In what city, in LA?
I'm not sure.
Can you email me with any info that you've got? Because I've been trying to...
Oh, okay, sure, yeah. I mean, well, just as an investigator's tip, you know, there's a website called zabasearch.com, And if you plug in a name, particularly a middle name or a birth date, it brings you up a free database of listings for that name. So Valerie Schulte shouldn't be too hard to find on
Unless
that.
she got married.
Exactly. That's the worst nightmare.
What's that website?
It's zabasearch.com.
ZABA?
ZABA search.com. Yeah. So it's good, useful for finding people. Yeah.
You talked to Michael Wayne?
Yeah, I did speak to Michael Wayne, and he's quite a strange guy. He's actually born in Manchester, so I ended up getting his birth certificate in London, so I could get his birth date, so I could do a Zaba search and find him. You know, so he was quite weird. I mean, I talked to him 4 or 5 times, and each time he said, "Oh, I'm going to have to decide if I want to get involved in this or not," and eventually he said, "I don't want anything to do with your project." So he was so kind of flaky. It left the aftertaste that there was something he didn't want to talk about, or even though that photograph seems to indicate that he was found without a gun and everything, but it would be good to talk to him. But he lives in Los Angeles, and you should be able to find him, track him down.
You're familiar with your transcript, Shane?
Which one?
You're familiar with your transcript in this film you showed.
Yeah.
Let's get off the floor. When he said on the stage, "That's him," I missed who was he saying that's him? Mr. Ayers.
Oh, okay. Well, I think Bradley Ayers feels that it's David Morales and Gordon Campbell were the men in the video, which were basically two CIA agents that he knew in Miami.
On the podium.
On the podium.
Says that's him.
Really? I don't remember that bit, sorry.
I was hoping you'd remember.
I'm not too sure what it is.
I think he went to the back of the crowd, and then he said that.
Oh, sorry, okay, no. Okay, I know what you're talking about now. Basically there was the figure at the back of the crowd in the Ambassador Ballroom. Yeah, he felt he was David Morales. So there was a little spotlight on him as he's at the back of the audience.
He said that's him.
That's him. So he means that's David Morales. That's the guy that I knew in JM Wave at the time. Okay.
This is about, and I read something years ago, I can't place it, but there's a suspicion that Bobby Kennedy knew he was hit from behind and turned around and grabbed Cesar.
Yeah.
And that is why the tie is on the floor.
Yeah.
Has anybody got any witnesses say anything about the grabbing that tie, or how did that tie come off?
Well, I mean, we can tell from the way the bullets hit that the rough motion of Bobby Kennedy was. I mean, people talk about his hand going up to his head, after he was hit, and then obviously 2 of the bullets actually got the armpits up, and Noguchi said his arm was raised. So he must have spun, to the left or to the right, or he must have spun in some direction in this kind of movement. And whether he went back and grabbed the clip-on tie at the same time, who knows, or whether it just fell.
He fell back against him, didn't he?
Well, and then he would have. Then he fell back this way as he fell to the floor. Yeah. So I mean, it's hard to simulate exactly what the movement would be. But I mean, if he was shaking hands and then he sees the gun and then he goes up like this and then he loses his balance and he falls backwards. Whether he then grabs the tie on the way down or whether he brushes against. I mean, Caesar, I think in one interview also said that the maitre d', meaning Carl Euchre, kind of jumped when the gun went off and knocked back against him, and that was the reason why Caesar fell back against ice machines. But then the next time he asked, he changed it to a different story. So it's like, so I don't know who hit Caesar, and I don't know why his clip-on tie fell off, but yeah, I mean, the inconsistencies in his statements, he's fairly consistent up to the shooting, but then afterwards, on virtually everything, he changes every time he's asked, so.
Did he get that tie back, or did he auction it?
No, I think, well, I mean, you can see from an hour later, he was still walking around without it, so I think he just consigned it to the Bill Epridge photo,
Sean,
I'm the one that first brought that out to the world.
Yeah, no, I mean, you've got to...
Grabbing
Yeah.
Kennedy is complete.
Oh, so
You don't think Kennedy didn't grab his neck? No. No, okay. Well, yeah, I mean, we have to pay tribute to Ted again for doing all the work on Caesar, and if he hadn't done that early interview with Caesar in '69, Caesar may have escaped our attention. So, I commend you for that. Yeah.
The interview was not a short interview.
No, I know. It's a lot of, yeah, and just trapping him in a way as well.
Turner, is Bill still here tonight?
I think he's outside, but yeah.
The technique I use, of course, wasn't intuitive, but when I was working for intelligence, I was taught that.
Oh, really?
Which is very, very low key.
Yeah, excellent.
A lot of people don't know that.
Yeah.
And why the Secret Service contacted me. When come out in my book.
Okay, I look forward to it. Yeah.
But the film was commendable. And now that I see it with my own eyes, I definitely did. Very interesting.
Thank you. Good.
Of course, I picked you off.
Yeah, no, I hear a lot too.
Very good reason.
Yeah, no, thank you.
Because I had volumes and I wasn't writing a book, I was doing rented out.
Yeah. Excellent. Cool.
Sean, you know how Andre Paul was working for French intelligence? And the news, it's not unusual, the intelligence agencies, they get you as an informer to keep, because you're close to somebody they're watching, right? Now what about this? Caesar was recruited just to be an informant because somebody knew him that knew the intelligence establishment in LA. And so they brought him in, he agreed to be an informant, nothing more, just to say what's going on. So anyway, for some reason, he carries a gun in his waistband. Maybe he's better with it and he's not good with it, or whatever. So when the shooting starts, he draws and he starts shooting. And maybe he did shoot Robert Kennedy by mistake, and maybe he knew it. So after it's over, he leaves and he goes to his contact outside and says, I drew and I started firing. I think I hit Robert Kennedy by mistake. And I says, what do I do? And they said, well, just keep quiet. Let's see what happens, and we'll get back to after check with my contact. And then the decision was made the next day, not because outside of Donald Schuman, nobody else could say it, and they decided to browbeat Donald Schuman, see if they could keep it very low publicity. And the fact that he's an informant, you don't want that to come out because then it's going to smell like the hierarchy had him hit. I mean, what do you think about something like that?
I mean, I'd never thought of it in that way, but I mean, it is possible because Caesar was told, I think at 11:20, almost an hour before Kennedy came through the pantry, that the senator was going to go that way, and very few people knew about it at that point. So he certainly had that intelligence as to where Kennedy was going to come, therefore where Sirhan should be placed. So as a means of transmitting that information to somebody, that would be useful to any plot.
Well, no plot. No, Caesar he fired in self-defense and he accidentally hit Kennedy. No plot.
Yeah, I mean, for me, the accidental firing is difficult to swallow. I mean, I know some people put that forward, but how you could fire 5 times accidentally at such close range?
Oh no, 3 times. He didn't fire accidentally. He fired in response to Sirhan, but at least one of the bullets hit Kennedy. So because he's an informant, he goes out. He leaves the scene, doesn't come back for a couple minutes, gets rid of the gun, tells his contact what happened, and I think I accidentally hit Kennedy with one of the shots.
Yeah. Well, I mean, if we take the kind of paradigm put forward by Dr. Jolling and Philip Van Prague, that 5 shots from behind, and 4 of those hitting Kennedy, I just find it difficult to believe that those could all be kind of accidental, So,
right on the button, Shane.
Yeah.
Art was not here, so he can't speak. I wish he was here.
Yeah.
But here's Harper. Ted, this was a professional hit. So.
Yeah.
You would also have to deal with the fact
It
that
was not an accident.
It wasn't politically neutral either. I mean.
Well, I mean, I think you can't look at it in isolation either, because if it was an accident, then where does Sirhan's programming come from, and where does the I mean, if you put it all together, I would agree. I just can't see it being an accident. But I'm not 100% certain it's Caesar either, but he certainly deserves examination. It's odd because he's very sloppy and casual in some instances. I mean, he was actually interviewed by a radio station 20 minutes after the shooting, and he gives a very blasé kind of description of what happened. But there are little hints there. I mean, there are hints in his police interview that he gives a little pause before he describes what caliber weapon he had in his holster. Just little details like that suggest he will, even immediately afterwards, he was already twisting the truth. So yeah, I mean, I think I just don't understand how Moldea can have absolved, and especially using, you know, the polygraph test of all things, you know, after the history that's had in this case, to use a polygraph test, you know, 25, 30 years later to give this guy a clean bill of health when all the evidence points the other way to him being involved. You know, hopefully we'll get to subpoena him at some point and see him back here. That's all I can say, really. Okay, I've got to go, and Mark, sorry, I've got to go, unfortunately, but look forward to seeing your film. Yeah, I've got to fly, go off. But no, it's a really pleasure meeting you, and I'll keep in touch and hope, you know, good luck this year with the case. Let's hope we get it reopened. Thank you.
If it's possible to get the speaker up front, then that'd be great. For anyone who missed the first hour last night, this film will be shown again at the WEX conference in early October, excuse me. But we're going to pick it up in the last 30 minutes.
He's an artist from salesman.
Oh, yeah. No, I don't. You know, the other thing I should say for the record, just to put it out there, because there's stuff I didn't include in the film, there was some talk earlier about whether there were any police at the hotel that night. There are two things to bear in mind. One, under hypnosis, Sirhan talked about seeing a policeman there, which at the time they attributed to possibly being firemen, because they said there were no policemen there. When I interviewed Lisa Urso, she said that during Bobby's speech, she got hot, went into the pantry, got a glass of water, and at that time, there was only one person in the pantry, and that was a policeman standing guard or in front of the door that was the entrance to the colonial room. I simply put that out there as information. I don't know what it means, what the significance is. So this is on a hard drive, so it just takes a little bit longer than you're used to for fast forward, but hopefully we'll be there soon.
Oh, John Jones, can I ask you a question?
Yeah.
The previous film, was it said that it was the Boulevard Company may have been, or was an actual front for the CIA?
Sorry?
Boulevard Watch Company?
Yeah.
Was it, did the narrator say it may have been, or it actually was a front?
Well-known front. They're saying it was a well-known front in the film. I didn't do the research on it, but.
Oh.
Which doesn't mean that everybody who works there works for the CIA. It was not a wholly owned proprietary. It was just that overseas CIA agents pretend to be businessmen.
International covered is
Yeah.
here for full of them.
They still made watches.
It's like Maxwell Smart being a green card, person.
At USAID, I mean, it was used for CIA purposes. It also had a, legitimate function, but it was a cover.
John, how long did O'Sullivan work on this project, the RFK project? How many years?
Oh, Shane, I don't know. I mean,
It's
fairly recent.
It's a couple of years. He interviewed me in late '06.
Yeah.
Interviewed me in '04.
He interviewed you in '04. My. So he's been at this for quite a while, actually.
Well, yeah, he first came forward with the Morales thing. I think it was October '06 or something like that. November '06.
That was when he interviewed when you was the fall of '06.
I believe he forgot this adapter for his Mac.
I believe he has long gone, but
eBay. Or the auction off here. Charity auction. Who's gonna mail it to Ireland?
No, he's doing something here in the States. Came especially in to show this and see us.
He's on his way to New York right now.
Oh, okay.
If any of you are not getting COPA emails currently, we have those sign-in sheet when you register. Fill it in, you'll get them, but if you didn't fill out a little slip of paper and you want to get our emails and notices, we don't do too many, 5 or 6 a year, but so we won't swamp you. And then we have a website, politicalassassinations.com, that we're keeping up to date now. We're putting a lot of articles and new information on. We have a YouTube page. We also have a everything. MySpace. We have COPA networks for those. They have little chats and you can go there. But John's been posting a lot of material. And I also put up recently a site because Mike Smolik and I worked for Cynthia McKinney, and we developed, did a lot of research, and developed a 17-count impeachment bill for her. She only used 3 of the counts. So we put up the original 17, and then we also worked to give about another, I think it was 11 or 12 count on Cheney that Dennis Kucinich introduced. And we're currently up to working on a Bush, I think a bill's going to come in with 100 different grounds for impeachment, but the site's called groundsforimpeachment.com. And we're also developing an impeachment wheel that has the categories on the outside, and want to send it to Congress and say, you know, pick your grounds for impeachment, or, you know, my friend Gene Case said, spin this, Dana Perino. So that should come out, but it's gotten to be so many that we may have to, it spins on the front and the back at the same time. You know, 17 wasn't too bad. And new stuff all the time. So there's groundsforimpeachment.com.
Yeah, but the hard drive goes through it faster. It'll be about 5 minutes.
Just by 4.
Does it have a potential commercial because you got the award? I mean, is there some chance it got a landmark or?
You know, it has more potential commercial value if Bill Pepper makes a national deal in rehypnotizing Sirhan. You know, it's just they've got to see dollar signs. One of the things that you know, film people say is, yeah, but the young audiences really care about it. It's mainly been the film festivals run by, you know, younger people that have really expressed an interest in it.
There's another film in progress. Some people saw outtakes from it last year in Dallas called The Searchers, that award-winning documentary, and Randy Benson is still working on it, but I think he's going to have something close to a finished version in November, and we're trying again this year to see if we can get the Texas Theater to show it.
What's it about?
It's about the researchers.
Oh, about the researchers, yeah.
About us. Yeah. People that do the work. Mostly on JFK, but.
It's unfortunate, I guess Vincent Piero, I didn't see him yesterday.
Yeah, I didn't see him yet.
He said he was going to try to.
They said, told me he would. I saw him on Tuesday.
Whatever happened on that, you know, they were looking for bodies in the Charles Manson thing out in the desert. Whatever happened on that dig?
They didn't find anything.
It was a trip to the desert for the people involved.
I think it was the local.
Around the ranch, you mean?
Yeah, they even showed, they have on the front page of the LA Times, the chairs are still there, which Manson and his followers sat on as a lookout. Out here, Death Valley, they're still there. And they were looking, they were digging in 3 spots for bodies that spotter dogs had singled out as the sniff of death, even after 30 years. You know how the decomposition rises through the soil.
It was interesting watching Shane's film, seeing a lot of the same people that I interviewed, doing a lot of the same stock film, and yet the 2 films are, I think, extremely different. It's always interesting.
Yeah, I thought I was watching the same, your movie for a minute, parts of it, yeah, it was the same.
And yet they are extremely different movies, and sometimes I think to myself, well, does one filmmaker really make a different movie than the other? But these are an interesting comparison. They're both interesting films, but different in their own ways.
We know of at least 2 people who were killed there. Probably Bosalea killed someone, and so did Squeaky Fromm. And there certainly could have been other bodies, but at last I heard, the neighbors bought part, if not all, of that ranch. It was an old Howard Hughes RKO movie ranch. And George Spahn, who had worked for Hughes, was out there, and the girls were taking care of him and stuff while Manson was living there.
Do we have the adapters right?
And the other,
No, we don't have the right, we have the other adapter.
I understood the neighbor bought the
There needs to be our.
some of it to create a Bavarian beer garden, and the neighbors were parts of the Krupp family, Krupp Arms and Nazi Germany, Big Steel, and that's who these hippies lived next to, was Krupp. But I'm surprised they'd be going out there that much later to look for more trouble.
You know, they talked about in the article about an informant had told them a long time ago about more bodies out there. And the LA Times doesn't discuss who the informant is. And that's what the whole thing's based on. And then
Somebody's trying to get out of prison.
said in
Maybe
his
one of the
book,
girls is telling them.
huh?
Maybe one of the girls is telling him in exchange for a parole or an early release. Some of them are still in prison.
All of them.
All of them are? Maybe. Patty
Yeah,
Carmichael and
I saw something with Bugliosi recently, and he thinks that they should all get the death penalty, even today, including Leslie Van Houten, who's like, I think ever act quite a bit.
Oh, no, if they find more bodies out there, they can recharge him and get another death sentence conviction, and this one won't be overturned. Yeah, that's what he's talking about.
Why are they talking about overturning Manson's conviction?
No, not that they overturned their death penalty convictions. I mean sentences. But if they find these bodies and they pin them on the Manson family, they can give them another death sentence and actually execute these people.
Well, they also can defend them so he can stop writing books. I'm so glad that Bugliosi didn't have time to meet with me, because I would have had to cut him out of my movie because of that book that he wrote.
It's scurrilous.
well, now you see his latest book is about charging George Bush with murder for the lies in the Iraq War.
And see, the thing is, that's
When I talked to him last, he said he and his wife are considering leaving the country because it had become so fascist here.
Well, aren't we all?
Yeah.
The irony is that a lot of people who raised him as the godhead of, debunking conspiracy theories, now they're like, oh, he's a loon, we can't trust him. They went, including John McAdams, and the McAdams Forum has totally disavowed Bugliosi and written him off as a nut now.
It sure goes back and forth.
Did we see that yesterday, Mark? St. Patrick's Cathedral?
Oh, yeah.
Wow.
Now, does anyone know, is HBO still moving forward with the 10-hour miniseries based on that Bugliosi book? What's the latest word?
Last I heard, they were working on a
Tom
script.
Hanks is going to play in it?
I hope not.
Was it Tom Hanks?
Tom Hanks is producing, he's executive producer, it's in development.
That movie based on Bugliosi's Oswald did it alone. Well, I would imagine they'd still go forward with it because they have to keep coming out with something every year to
I hope
convince
so,
us.
it's the best thing that could ever happen.
The movie event of 2010.
There must be some way Oswald did it alone.
This show on the screen is approved, nothing.
Yes.
No, they're gonna show us Oswald, so that we've seen it and have it in our heads that it actually happened.
Ran a segment about the new.
They're gonna show us footage of.
They're getting a conversation when he says, Vince, you really think now you're saying that there could have been 2 assassins, but they didn't know about each other, and that both came there to shoot Bobby, and they happened to be there at the same time, and he's going, hey, this can happen. How could you say it couldn't happen? And then they started getting into that kind of a debate.
Oh, yeah, that's definitely YouTube.
That's the Washington Post solution to the shots in the front in Dallas. 2 guys came and there's no proof they knew each
Oh my
other.
God, we're getting close now.
Mark, remember Bugliosi was at my house one day, showed him the picture of Rotzi and Wright.
Yeah.
He left the house, within a couple hours he'd had Rotzi on, there was a signature on the statement that was a bullet in that door jam. He got to Wright and the police department already had gotten to Wright, and so Wright said, yes, I agree with Rotzi, but I can't make a statement.
Yeah.
So give him a break.
Okay.
Forget the book.
St. Vince.
Use the book for a
The book,
doorstep. The book for a doorstep.
Yeah, there you go.
No, I returned it, got my $50 back after
You did?
reading the introduction.
You can get it
Oh,
for
wow.
you can get it for $8 now.
Is it down to $8 now?
Yeah, something like that.
Oh, fine. Yeah, doorstop.
Is that with or without the
Probably at
survey?
Costco.
Bugliosi has
Oh,
a book
yeah,
on
yeah,
George
yeah.
Bush, calling him a war criminal.
Yeah.
Like
See,
a
it's-
murderer.
Normally
Yeah.
I'd read that book because Bugliosi
What's
wrote it.
this
I mean,
there?
you get
And
the
I think about
print.
this after the election, too.
Yeah.
It goes back and forth.
So what are we all calling in terms of an Iran invasion before the election?
October.
No.
Are they taking bets on it in Vegas yet?
Ugh, don't even go there.
We're dangerously close here.
Well, Ritter says so. I've seen some stuff saying July.
I think they're leaking nukes to Turkey to get them to Iran to use them against us.
I know at the International Court, a friend of mine who knows someone that's working there, so
Civil
they've already
that's why
got
they're
a
shutting it
case
down.
prepared against Bush there. They can't do anything about it because we're not a signatory to it. But they've got a case on it prepared against him for war crimes.
Well, no one can try us for war. I mean, even in Nuremberg, we would only participate in the Nuremberg trials because of the Collins Amendment that said that the United States could not be similarly tried for such crimes without prior approval. So we'll prosecute other people for these things, but not us.
What were we worried? Were we worried about something specific?
Well, now they're saying that we can't even cooperate with the International Court because those bastards might try to try a U.S. citizen and soldier for a war crime in Iraq or someplace. But yeah, I mean, it's in the Nazis' defense. They said, we learned all this from you. We learned the mass sterilization from you. We learned how to put people in camps. We learned genocide from you. One doesn't defend the other, but that was the Nazi defense, was why do you have us on trial? You did all this already.
This place is wild, isn't it?
Why don't we just start at the beginning?
I've seen,
It's like-
Ritter says we're definitely
Oh, no, she didn't.
What's the total length of the film?
The film's 90 minutes.
I don't
So
know.
it should be about another 2.5 minutes of speed search time to get through everything.
You
don't have chapters on it?
Yeah, Prognosis for what he's got is on average a year, but it could be 3 or 4 months.
Well, if that's the case, then a radical suggestion, what do you got to lose?
What you got to lose is the medical establishment, because I've been through this with a number of loved ones. The medical establishment, the mentality is, you do not try an experimental treatment until the current FDA-approved treatment has failed. Then, when they've got 9 toes in the grave, and nothing can save them, then you try the experimental treatment, and the drug company gets data from it. But from what they found from the vaccine for brain cancer, it has been effective for a significant percentage of people.
Well, you convinced me. I can just say this, that the Kennedys are smart people. Other smart people who have lots of money, when faced with this, are going to look for radical
You
treatment.
reinvent the wheel. Everyone has to reinvent the wheel when it happens. And by the time you figure out you've been fucked, because I've been through it with, it's specifically with 3 loved ones, when you figure out that they fucked you, it's too late.
I think it was, it's not identified.
And they don't do it on purpose. It's the culture of the medical profession. It's the way it's done.
Isn't this ahead of what we saw?
No.
He's got it.
Yeah, it was something we done here.
Suicide program.
No, we're almost there. This is the trial phase, and when the trial phase ends, then we.
Did you see that guy that just did it on the drawing that looked just like William Campbell?
You know what, in fact, if you want to kill the light back there,
I'll
close the door here.
He looked exactly like this guy in the courtroom. You didn't see that?
Can you get your light around?
No, I killed it.
Okay. Sorry, I wasn't supposed to use the word kill. It's going to take a guy like Harvey Weinstein, who used to run Miramax, now runs the Weinstein Company, and who can put a movie out and just dump millions of dollars if he wants to play, to be convinced that by putting this movie out there in September and October, he'll tip the election. He could do that if he saw the movie, or if there are such things as wealthy, old money Democrats or Democratic Party fundraisers that somehow can raise funds by the Democratic Party, raise a couple $1 million, and finance a private release so that in September and October, RFK is up in the marquee in every major American city, and the pundits are saying Obama is the best thing we've had since Bobby Kennedy.
Yeah.
Then maybe you're tipping the people that are defecting because of prejudice against Obama, which is what could turn the election.
Have you tried Mark Cuban?
Who, I'm sorry?
Mark Cuban?
I don't know.
He owns a basketball team. He
man.
put out
Oh, the dude,
he put out Good Night and Good Luck, Enron, the Enron documentary.
No, I don't. Are you in touch with
Utah
that?
Jazz, isn't it?
You know,
No, Dallas. He owns
Dallas,
Dallas
yeah.
Mavericks.
If anybody knows anyone, marksobel.com is my site. Have them get in touch with me.
Have you
Otherwise,
tried participant meetings?
participants, I have not yet spoken to. They have been aware of it's the Extreme Film Festivals. No one has contacted me. No one has showed up at the film festivals. Participant, I would have expected to be the one
Yeah, of all
company
of
that would
them,
have
yeah.
responded.
RFK Assassination
Oh, that's a shame.
collection.
They
I know
could
somebody there I know.
could still, look, maybe at a film festival in LA.
I wouldn't hold your breath. Having worked up on the Hill, I wouldn't hold your breath for the Democratic Party or its minions. I mean, I saw Bill Gould, who's the staff member for the Progressive Caucus the other day, and I said, "Do you remember when we used to say in the session I was in with Cynthia, well, wait till there's a Democratic majority," and then I used to say, "Yeah, nothing will change," and sadly, it's pretty much the case. We have some other films if people are interested in seeing them. I don't know if this is working. What is it? So, well, they don't close till 1 tonight, they say. So, we have some other films if people are interested in a little bit of time. I don't know if people want to stay and see any other films.
What, Emilio Estevez? Yeah, that movie was awful.
Can't get their attention. Lisa! I'm trying to make an announcement, I'm sorry. Yeah. I think Obama will save us either. Obama's website says he wants 100,000 more troops. You can just imagine what he will do with them. He says he wants the nuclear option open on Iran. He's advocated going into both Pakistan and continuing in Afghanistan. He seems to have...
You have to say to get elected, we all know that.
Well, but I don't think they're merely things to get elected. I think if he said those and went into office and didn't do them, he wouldn't survive it either. I think that...
No, he didn't.
He wasn't in during one, was he?
He wasn't a senator then. He's only been in office since 2020. Yeah, stick to the facts, people, please. You know, we can all say.
But
It's so fun.
so I'm just saying I wouldn't hold out. I wrote a little rant recently that got into steam shovel press, and one of the things I said in it was how many coincidences does it take you to convince you that there's a conspiracy? And I said, if I haven't given you enough, I'm sure I have 3 more. But at the end of the article, I said, and how many conspiracies does it take to convince you it's a coincidence? So both are a question. We have some other films if people want to stay. I think the building closes at 1. One of the people who's attending brought Robert Kennedy Remembered, a tribute honoring RFK's life and works, and it's a historic moment at the Democratic National Convention, 68. It's 20 minutes. I brought our Joe Brown and the people that spoke at our Memphis conference, if people who weren't at Memphis are interested in seeing any of that. Ted Chirac was going to bring a tape that he didn't have, but I do have his Second Gun film. If people haven't seen that or are interested in seeing that. I have a film about Dr. King called Citizen King. That's just, it's not about the assassination, but it's a good piece about his life, and it takes him beyond where they freeze him in 63 on the steps of the, with the civil rights dream, and it takes him into 68 when he starts talking about ending the war and the poverty politics. I think this is Bob Groden's, just different films of the Kennedy assassination, Zapruder and others. Pardon? He's done more than, I think this is just his latest compilation. He's done some over the years. And this is a BBC special on RFK, but I think a lot of what's in it was covered in these films. It used to be that this was the only thing that had the Sandy Serrano stuff and the browbeating and everything, so I don't know that it's got a lot that's new. But usually what I have is people just make a decision like what we want to see, so I can take a show of hands on some of this, but maybe a simple way to do it is, do people want to see more films about Robert Kennedy, or do we want to see films about Martin Luther King? I guess that would be a simple way to do it. Any kind of a vote? How many people are interested in the films that I brought that have Robert Kennedy as a focus? They'll raise their hand. Okay, that's 2, 3, 4. And how many are interested in seeing anything about Martin Luther King? Okay, well, I'm not seeing a hand for that, if anybody's hearing me. So for the Robert Kennedy, the choice is a 20-minute Robert Kennedy Remembered, and the other is Ted Chirac's Second Gun.
Oh, you're showing us?
No, I'm showing them.
Oh, you're showing us?
I'm taking a vote over what people want to see.
What's the duration or length again?
Sorry? Well, the Second Gun, I think, is about an hour and a half again.
And then the other one?
And the other one is 20 minutes.
Let's watch that.
It's not great.
It's what?
It's not great. It's the one that won
It's
the
just
Academy Award in '68.
Yeah, it's just it's not anything about the assassination. It's
That's the
just
one they showed at the Democratic Convention in Chicago.
yes, yes.